What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So just recently, I took a poll on the channel where I expressed my interest wanting to play or replay the Arkham games. Now, for those of you who may or may not know, the only Arkham game that I haven't beaten is Batman Arkham Asylum. For some reason, the game just continues to elude me. But on the other hand, I've beaten the other games multiple times, so I'm certain somewhere, somehow, this makes up for the fact that I haven't still beaten Arkham Asylum, I guess. But in this particular poll, 398 votes were actually cast, and you guys have basically said that I should play Arkham Origins first. So in this particular series that I'm actually planning, I'm hoping to just talk about the game, talk about lessons learned, and potentially some of the things that I hope the game would probably showcase in the Gotham Knights game, or probably things that Gotham Knights might adopt from Arkham Origins. I'll probably go ahead and do the same for Arkham City and then Arkham Knight. But from the poll, you guys are saying that more people are saying to play Arkham Asylum afterwards. So I think we're going to follow that order and make things very, very uniform in a sense. But before I even jump into that, I was going to start playing Arkham Origins. In fact, I played the very first opening scene. It was actually quite intense. The game is just solid. But something really fun happened. As I started to try to save the files in one of my old external hard drives, I realized that I'd actually played Batman Arkham Origins in 2019. Crazy. I open up the file and I see in my own folder files that are actually Batman Arkham Origins that were basically played in 2019, December specifically of 2019. And I remember that Christmas period, I actually sat down and beat the entire game. I don't remember if I actually added the Cold Heart DLC, but this was something that I was able to do in that time frame. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably just basically take the gameplay footage. We'll talk about those aspects of the game, talk about boss fights, encounters, mechanics, traversal, just all kinds of really fun stuff that I find interesting, and even color schemes. Some of you may or may not know, but the presentation of Gotham Knights with the area that they decided to show with Mr. Freeze and all the snow, it really rings a lot like Arkham Origins, because Arkham Origins was set on a Christmas, Eve, and this was basically how the story was set up. Basically, I'm talking about just environmental feel. I'm not saying that there's too much, but you'd just be very shocked to see how kind of similar they are in terms of the outdoor world and the outdoor aspects. And so this is something that's really cool. So let's jump into a few seconds in looking at, say, Batman Arkham Origins, how the game has basically aged, and a few things that we have to consider as quite pertinent as we're going into this. So one really cool thing is Batman Arkham Origins is a very old game. The game has aged a lot. In fact, in my attempt to play the game again, I realized how clunky this game actually is right now compared to the feel, the controls, and mechanics in other new games. But it doesn't still take away, though, from how special this game is in regard to a game that was, in my opinion, what I call very gutsy. And when I say gutsy, I'm talking about a game where the developers were given a mandate to pretty much go out there, make a game that was going to be inserted into the already established, already well-known, already well-respected Arkham Asylum and Arkham City timeline in order for them to eventually come up with, say, Batman Arkham, I think Arkham Knight. I think this was basically what it was. So when you kind of think about that, when you kind of consider all of this, you see that Arkham Origins basically, was a very solid game. It did a very good job in presenting a very interesting story, action-packed, that really did engage the audience. There were things that were done that, in my opinion, nonetheless, I think the Rocksteady games did not necessarily throw down in all of its potential. I think they did in very interesting amounts or quantities, but they didn't throw it all in one game. And that's, in my opinion, what I think the boss fights or the really, really interesting plethora of enemy NPCs in terms of, the villains that they threw in Arkham Origins. In fact, till today, we usually talk about how Arkham Origins has some of the very first, interesting boss fights compared to Arkham Knight and some other really, other aspects of that game. Even though that game was newer because of the Batmobile, it just really, in a sense, stole the show from some people's experience. But you look at, Arkham Origins, you're going to see a very gritty game, a game where all you do is just take your fist to the entire game. That's how the game pretty much felt like. You're just a young Batman who's crazy, a little, I wouldn't say crazy. And when I say crazy, I mean that in a good way, but who's just trying to help solve the situation in Gotham at that time. Things are insane. Things are going crazy. You start out at, Arkham's prison or whatever it is, and, you're seeing that your very first enemy that you're going to be dealing with is Killer Croc. Now, this is very important and very critical. So already by this time, Arkham Asylum was already established. So this game was going to be coming in a place where, you're going to be before Arkham Asylum. So they basically gave you Killer Croc, who was in Arkham Asylum, from the research that I've done, a very critical figure in that game. Not necessarily your main boss, but a very central figure to the game. And I think this was really cool for them to show him to you in the very first few minutes of the game, because you already played Asylum. You'd be like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Because from what your memory served you, you were seeing pretty much a villain and somewhat how he had been notorious before he found his way in the Asylum. So this is actually something that I wanted to go ahead and quickly bridge the gap with Gotham Knights before I sign out for this video. What is Gotham Knights going to really point back towards or point forward to when the fans start playing the game? Because this game is developing itself in a whole different universe. So we get it. We understand that they're probably trying to start something new, trying to, maybe garner an entire new series of video games, tell a story from the perspective of these knights. But at the end of the day, these knights are not on their own footing. I've said this and mentioned this in various and numerous videos and settings. These knights are a product of the work that Batman has done in terms of this fictional world that they're in. Batgirl is not Batgirl without Batman. It's just the truth. Jason Todd is not the Red Hood without Batman. Even though his story is an unfortunate story, it's really, a sad story, but Batman also has a sad story. Richard Drake, Tim Drake, or, Damian Wayne, whichever Robin you want to point to, is not Robin without Batman. And, some of you might be saying, are you going to say it? Yes, I'll say it. Dick Grayson is not Nightwing without Batman. So I'm hoping that the developers are able to go ahead and make these connections as they're writing Gotham Knights, as they're actually bringing these knights to the forefront and tying the connections to things that we already know. And they don't have to be video games. They could be, animated series type, references. They could be even, the graphic novel references, or just story and plot references. And I'm certain they'll do that, but I'm hoping they do it in really big ways that really emphasize a lot. Even from this gameplay trailer alone, they started to throw out some really tiny Easter eggs that are quite interesting. But I'll continue with another video. We'll talk very much more, hopefully, about, Arkham Origins. We'll talk about some mechanics and the boss fights and just, some really cool things where you get to fight Killer Croc. I really wanted to talk a little bit about that and have its own video for it. But for now, let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching the video. I appreciate you guys so much, and hopefully we'll talk very soon. Peace out.